The cliche that we were all taught as school pupils is that in the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he was the first to get across any major ocean.
The history books have to be rewritten.
There was a lot more going on in sort of transoceanic voyages in the ancient period.
Columbus was a latecomer as far as all that went.
The question on everybody's mind is, which way did Nephi and his family go? Throughout the ages, people have looked at oceans as metaphors for life. Crossing a great expanse of open water can be likened to our mortal journey. Sometimes our lives are peaceful and calm, but other times we find ourselves caught in storms or even feel like we're sinking. The goal is to progress, to move forward, to reach the other side, to find our own promised land. But how do we get there? How do we navigate? Which way do we go? And what happens when something goes wrong? Lehi's crossing of the ocean to get to the promised land was included in the Book of Mormon for more reasons than just advancing the narrative. It holds lessons for us as readers, and it isn't the only story of ocean voyage in the text. The story of the brother of Jared and his barges, Haggoth and his enterprising shipbuilding, also paint a picture that, for some critics of the Book of Mormon, is problematic. Are they just stories, or is it actual history? From the early 1800s, a theory grew that the first people to populate the Americas, the Clovis people they were called, arrived on the continent by migrating on foot over a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska about 13,000 years ago. But there's a lot of new evidence that's been discovered that indicates that other people were already in the Americas before that time, when crossing the land bridge by foot wasn't possible due to massive ice glaciers covering the area. In a 2017 publication of Science, one of the most prestigious journals in the world, researchers reported the discovery of 10 civilizations along the coast of the Americas that predate the land bridge theory. So the question becomes, how did they get there? Aliens. I'm just joking, no. Boats. Science is now realizing that ancient boat voyages were much more common than previously believed. But where's the evidence? That is what I hope to find out.
Watercrafts have been available for thousands of years and were entirely capable of crossing the oceans.
And I was going overboard.
Well, hey, ahoy there, mateys. Welcome to episode 6, as in C6. That's a little maritime joke of mine. I'm good, I'm solid. I'm captaining this vessel for the theme of this episode. In fact, I think you'll enjoy it. We're out here on the open seas. Actually, Honolulu's about 600 yards in that direction, but I just kind of, you know what, I feel encumbered. Noah, take over for me, will you? You've got the con. Let me just run up to the front of the boat here and we'll kind of start this off right. Get this hat off. Pre-Columbian oceanic crossings. Now that might sound like a new concept to some of you, because if your childhood education was anything like mine, as far as you're concerned, Christopher Columbus was the first person to sail the ocean blue in 1492, and lo and behold, he discovered America. Does this sound familiar to you? I mean, we know that there were people already in the Americas. Columbus discovered them. But how did they get there? Well, we've already mentioned the prevailing land bridge theory, but why have scientists and historians traditionally not considered ocean travel? There are 4 main reasons why. First is that oceans are big. They've traditionally been considered uncrossable barriers. Second is that they didn't have the technology to build watercraft capable of withstanding such a voyage. Third, it would have been impossible to survive such a journey. Could they take enough water? What about food? And finally, some have insinuated that people just weren't intelligent enough to know that they could cross the ocean. And even if they did, how would they navigate it? Well, let's tackle these questions one by one, shall we? First, were oceans too big to cross for ancient people? That's the question that I recently asked Stephen Jett, one of the world's foremost experts in the field of pre-Columbian oceanic voyages. Today and in this whole episode, we're talking about oceanic travel. And I know you're the author of this book about yay big called Ancient
Ocean Crossings.
Ancient Ocean Crossings.
Yeah.
And that is obviously our topic of interest. So let's talk about pre-Columbian oceanic voyage. And what oceans are we talking about?
Well, as a professor, I would say all of the above. Of course, the cliche that we were all taught as school pupils is that in the year 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he was the first to get across any major ocean. As they might say today, ain't, in my region anyway, in Southwest Virginia. The fact of the matter is humans were extraordinarily mobile and in a maritime fashion from very, very early times. And Columbus was a latecomer as far as all that went.
So when you say very early times, how far back are we talking?
Paleolithic.
When is that?
Certainly we had people going to fairly remote islands, 40,000, 30,000 years ago.
Oh, no kidding.
Maybe
Okay.
even more.
How early, how far back do we have evidence that there was Old World to New World oceanic?
I would say the earliest really good evidence, and that is biological evidence, which you can't manufacture, you can't reinvent in the other hemisphere. Biological entities have their places of origin, and they're usually at least initially, their hemispheres of distribution. We have intestinal parasites in human burials from Brazil that go back more than 6,000 BC. And
these parasites would have originated?
They're old world parasites. They're tropical or subtropical parasites that could not have come around the Bering Strait region in the north because the climate didn't permit. So
they must have come
I don't think
via shipping of some kind.
Yeah, somebody got across. Watercrafts have been available for thousands of years or are entirely capable of crossing the oceans. Take the Polynesians, for example, who now it is clear reached South America, came all the way across from the west side of the Pacific out of Asia, crossed island by island for the most part, but ultimately got to South America. And we have Polynesian chickens in late pre-Columbian South America. We have the South American sweet potato in Polynesia.
Stop. Polynesian chickens?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So I guess that's biological evidence.
It is. And it's definitive as far as I can.
Science can trace where they originated.
Yeah, the evidence is pretty clear pretty early.
The fact that you can make those relationships is pretty cool. I mean,
yeah, cool. That's a technical term.
I know. Yeah, that's why I used it. I knew only you would really understand.
Yes.
And these knuckleheads, they don't talk on our level.
That's the jargon of our scientific efforts.
Are there any other evidences that are powerful like these that you're? I like the track that you're on. There
are quite a few of them. In a pre-Columbian pyramid in Mexico, there is a there was a burial that a Mexican archaeologist unearthed, undisturbed, and he found in this burial a terracotta head, portrait head, and it's a Roman manufacture, and dates, I think, to the 1st century A.D., and it was in good archaeological context, found by a professional archaeologist, and not just a surface find
Yes.
found by somebody who, just ordinary guy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the few good examples.
That's a pretty darn
It's a pretty good
one.
one. Now, does that mean the Romans were there? Not necessarily. It's a Roman object, but it does not have to have been carried by a Roman
Right.
person.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to have come over in Roman times, but just at least sometime before Columbus.
Right. Almost irrelevant who carried it over, but
Yeah,
the
at least
fact
it
that
shows there was
Yeah.
something carried from the old world in pre-Columbian times.
there's been other voyages made in the
Experimental
spirit of,
voyages,
Yeah,
yes.
experimental voyages.
The whole topic of experimental voyages is a major one, and is very telling, I think. It involves creation of replica watercraft, replicas of ancient kinds of watercraft, and then making voyages in these watercraft with using the sailing techniques and often the, not always, but often the navigational techniques of the ancients.
Were these people, were they doing it just to see if it could be done?
See if it could be done. Show that these watercraft were capable using empiricism.
Yes.
Let's check it out.
Let's do it ourselves.
That's another technical term, checking it out.
Yeah.
And,
it is. The lexicon grows.
Yes.
There sure seems to be an awful lot of reasons to think that there was a lot going on in a transoceanic sense long before Columbus, long before the early explorers. And that's important. That's critical to what we're talking about. Thank you so much, really.
Thank you.
Such
Thank
a
you.
pleasure. There's nothing more to say. End of episode. Roll credits. Cue the cool music we have. The drone shot, the big sweeping epic drone shot. Thank you, John. Get that thing up in the air. No, wait a second. Wait a minute. You're right. There's plenty of evidence of pre-Columbian oceanic journeys, but as science continues to catch up with history, I do continue to have more questions. Like, for example, what did ancient ships look like? In 1 Nephi, chapter 13, verse 10, it says, "And it came to pass that I looked and beheld many waters, and they divided the Gentiles from the seed of my brethren." Nephi here sees that his posterity will wind up on a different continent, a great distance from where he was traveling in the wilderness. At some point, he must have realized that he would be the one to make that journey. Yet the Book of Mormon says that the ship that he built was, quote, "not after the manner of men." We may never know exactly how Nephi's ship was built, but examining some examples of ancient ocean crossing vessels near to his time could be enlightening. Well, I had the chance recently to speak with a British sailor and adventurer named Philip Beale, and he gave me some answers. This handsome gentleman here is Philip Beale. What we really want to talk to you about is your adventures in seafaring archaeology. Is that even a thing?
Yeah, it's sort of called experimental archaeology, where we are recreating, vessels from history and exploring how they could have sailed, where they could have gone, what their capabilities were.
And the beauty of this is that, Philip, as I understand, you've actually had hands-on experience. This isn't theory now. You've actually built vessels and sailed them.
Yeah, that's right. I'm fortunate I've built two historical vessels. One was an Indonesian vessel, and then I've built and recreated some of the voyages of a Phoenician vessel from 600 BC.
Okay, yes, love that. So you just mentioned 600 BC Phoenicia, which is, as I recall, sort of somewhere near Israel.
Yeah, that's right. The Phoenicians inhabited that sort of coastal strip of the Eastern Mediterranean from Israel, up into to Palestine, the modern-day Lebanon, and a little bit of Syria that's on the coast. That is the, if you like, the Phoenician
Empire.
coastal strip where the Phoenicians originated from.
Okay.
And then they spread throughout the Mediterranean and beyond.
Got it. So you mentioned 600 BC. That's a date, for our purposes, that has a lot of significance. You're probably aware that as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we hold the Book of Mormon to be a sacred text, a historical text. But around 600 BC, a family supposedly left Jerusalem on a long journey and eventually made it to the Americas. Now, was there shipbuilding of that kind in 600 BC, the kind where you could put a ship together and take it clear across an ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. So archaeologists have found ships from that period. In fact, they've found very important ships even before that date, going right back to like 1300 BC. So, and my ship, the Phoenicia, was based on a wreck from 600 BC. So there absolutely were ships in that period of time in 600 BC. This ship was commissioned to recreate the voyage that Herodotus says the Phoenicians made circumnavigating Africa. And that was completely coincidental to the beliefs from the Book of Mormon. So we did it independently from that. I had no idea when I started the project in 2005 that there was a parallel with the Book of Mormon. So then in 2019, we did a voyage to see whether a Phoenician ship could have crossed the Atlantic and, in a way, recreated the voyage that many people believe Mulek made from the Mediterranean across to the Caribbean.
So you went the other way. So you went across the Atlantic.
Yes.
And how long was that? How long did that take?
Approximately 5 weeks to sail across the Atlantic.
What kind of manpower would it have taken to build a ship like that?
It took 5 or 6 shipbuilders, but using modern tools, but they had to recreate the ship in the ancient way, and using only the timbers that were available in the ancient world. It took them about 9 months to build it. Now, had you done that by hand, using the sort of primitive tools they would have had available, I think it would have taken a family probably 2 or 3 years to build a ship like that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the wood. What kind of wood would have been available to them or would have been appropriate to use?
The Lebanese cedars.
Oh, right, the cedars of Lebanon, yeah.
So, but that would have only really been for the keel and some of the planking. They would have used olive wood for the pegs and the dowels. And then for the mast and the boom, they would have used probably cypress fir, which was one of the most flexible timbers. And then for the ribs, probably either walnut or Mediterranean oak.
And are those the materials that you used when you...
Yeah, those are exactly what we used.
So you have a real familiarity with that. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. But what about food, provisions, things like that?
So in terms of sustainability, one of the great sort of innovations of the Phoenicians and the people from the Eastern Mediterranean was the development of these great storage jars, the amphora, that could contain wine or olive oil or water. So you had the ability for storage. And of course, they put in these amphora like fish paste, grain as well, and could store things. And these amphora are pointed specifically to fit in the bow, in the hull of the ship. So they're very sophisticated. And therefore, if you combine that with, some rainwater and fishing on a voyage like that, I think it's entirely feasible to get across.
I forgot about rainwater. It's not like you have to bring big jugs of fresh water.
No, you're going to get some rain, for sure.
So did you have any kind of rainwater collecting or capabilities on your boat?
Yeah, we did on our circumnavigation of Africa. We got a bit shorter water as we came up through the Atlantic. We got blown out across the Atlantic and then had to come all the way around with the Gulf Stream. So on our longest passage, we were 84 days at sea, but we still had enough water. So, you know, it's entirely feasible to do these long voyages with preparation and the equipment that the Phoenicians would have had. As I say, these amphora would have been their lifeline.
Well, Philip, thank you so much, really. Such a pleasure to meet you, to have you here.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Yeah, it's been great.
Philip's adventures on the Phoenicia are, of course, very, very cool. They corroborate what we heard from Steve and Jett earlier, but Philip isn't the only one who's dabbled in experimental archaeology. We found a guy by the name of Jean-Jacques Savin. He didn't use an ancient replica, but he built a 10-foot-long barrel boat with no steering mechanisms whatsoever, launched himself into the Atlantic and crossed the Atlantic in 127 days. Now, I don't know about you, but little barges that are tight like unto a dish comes to mind. Little Jaredite vibe, if you will. This thing's no good. Of course, we can't leave this topic without mentioning perhaps the greatest exploratory archaeologist adventurer of our time, Thor Heyerdahl.
Thor Heyerdahl believed in something called diffusionism. Rather than people in the New World being completely isolated, he believed that occasionally seafarers would make it across the ocean and introduce new artifacts, technologies, and species. He set out to prove this was possible, believing that people from South America could have reached Polynesia. The Kon-Tiki was built to prove that one could simply drift from the coast of Peru and land on islands over 4,000 miles away. Thor's boat, the Kon-Tiki, was essentially a glorified raft, built of natural materials such as balsa wood, bamboo, mangrove, and reeds. 101 days after launching from Peru, the Kon-Tiki's voyage ended when the raft struck a reef off French Polynesia. Heyerdahl's incredible voyages were not as impossible as people first thought.
Even after he successfully made these voyages, Heyerdahl was written off as nothing more than a stuntman. Only in relatively recent years have Heyerdahl's stunts been taken more seriously.
In 2020, Heyerdahl was vindicated. The world's leading science journal published conclusive DNA evidence for pre-Columbian contact between Polynesian individuals and Native Americans.
The narrative has changed, if you will, and in favor of the Book of Mormon, I might add. Being on a boat really helps kind of clear my mind and often my stomach as well, because the ocean, it can be rough. It's always changing. It's sometimes smooth and glassy, other times choppy, like life, really. It's a great metaphor. Like during the voyage of Nephi and his family crossing the ocean, things were great. They were being guided by the Liahona to the promised land. And out of nowhere, Laman and Lemuel decide to throw a dance party. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but you know what happens next. Nephi reminds Laman and Lemuel to remember by what power they were brought that far. And of course, they wouldn't have it. So they tied Nephi up, the Liahona stops working, and they are driven back upon the waters for 3 days in a horrible storm. You can only imagine how terrifying that must have been for this family that isn't exactly composed of hardened, experienced sailors. In fact, I spoke with someone recently who has been through a storm on the sea, and he was actually in a similar boat as Lehi's, if you catch my drift. Little pun there. Anyway, I think you'll find some of his thoughts on this interesting.
Boyd Tuttle is a Latter-day Saint publisher who was privileged to sail as a crew member on Philip Beale's historic voyage of the Phoenicia. Boyd spent 3 weeks on board, sailing from Carthage, Tunisia, through the Mediterranean. His experience was unforgettable, and he came back with a tale or two to tell.
I don't know if you knew this, but we were in Stratford-on-Avon recently, and we met with Philip Beale.
Yeah.
How did you get involved, and why? Why did you say, here's a guy who's going to take a boat halfway around the world, I'm in?
I was distributing his book here in the States.
Okay, there's the connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had that connection with him. We had gone back and forth with email a few times. And then he sent me a note and said that he was planning to take the same ship and cross the Atlantic to America. And I just invited him to dinner, he actually came to our home for breakfast while he was waiting for his flight Sunday night. And we spent the day together, and I drove him up to Snowbird to see the snow. On the way down, he just said, have you ever thought of joining my crew? And I'm like, well, I kind of dreamed of it, but I didn't know I
so
could
you had
actually
thought
do
of it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
just it's been like a childhood dream of mine because I love Thor Heyerdahl. And I read about Thor Heyerdahl back in 1972, cover to cover, the National Geographic. And so when Philip Beale had this ship made out of hewn timbers that just happens to date back to 600 BC.
And he just happens to say, hey, have you ever thought about
like
crewing?
Yeah.
And so what did you say? I mean, what?
So I said, I would love to go. Now I have to talk to my wife.
I understand you ran into some tough weather even during the 3 weeks that you were on it there.
We did. We hit the biggest storm of the entire voyage on the Mediterranean. And we were heading west and everything was good. And then we noticed the skies began to darken in the west. And within a few hours, it started to me looking like that scene from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader sailing into that blackened mist with lightning striking. And then the winds really started pounding and the rains came. And the ship, Philip estimates we were between 15 and 20 foot swells, actually 15 meter swells.
Oh, wow.
And so they were pretty big. And
how was that? How did you feel? What was going through your mind?
You would ride up, it was like a roller coaster, and then you would go down into the trough. And yeah, it was pretty stomach turning. And although the amazing thing is I never felt like the craft was going to break or fall apart.
Really?
No, it was the solidness of the design. I never felt like, oh no, she's going to break up. I was actually on duty, and it was 10 o'clock, and my shift to go to the helm came up. And I exited. Everybody was huddled down in the galley, trying to stay dry and warm. And so I exited out. I had all my rain gear and everything, and a life jacket, which of course you're required during a storm to wear. The ship was really rocking, and the water was coming over. And as I was heading back along the side of the galley, there's a safety rope that you just hold on to as you go along and keeps you safe. Well, right as I was reaching for the safety rope, a large wave on the starboard side just absolutely just shifted the ship at least a foot out from under my feet. And my hand missed the rope, and I got caught by the railing right here just above the knee, and I was going overboard. Anyway, as that happened, I found myself teetering on my whole body. All I wanted to do was get my gravity down to the ground.
Yeah.
And I brought myself down, and I was on the rail, literally just balancing on the rail. And I will just call it a miracle. I had another wave that hit the other side of the ship, pushed it back, and allowed my gravity to fall inside the rail instead of outside. And that was a real wake-up moment for me. Anyway, so I did finally make it back and traded the guy off at the stern and took the helm for an hour. And I was just glad. I didn't care if it was raining. I was just glad to be alive and on board. I had a few nights later, probably a week later, while sailing at night, I had a real epiphany. You asked about that before.
Yeah.
And that happened while the stars were out. It was crystal clear night. The stars seemed so close. And I was sailing by the stars. And during that moment, I really felt like, wow, this is me 2,600 years ago on a Phoenician vessel. And it's like, time is really kind of irrelevant when you realize that these things all actually happened and real people lived back then and they did these things.
Thank you so much for your willingness to be here and in a lovely setting and relive it all. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks.
What is this? Wait a minute. I think I got something. I hope you guys are hungry. Dinner's on me. You know, I love about the saltwater fish is they're so brightly colored. I don't know what this one is, but oh, that's what we call a Pacific rag. Sorry, fellas. So far, we've talked about several different people who've crossed the ocean. We've answered the question, was it possible? We've looked at several different vessels. We've even explored the dangers of the open seas. Now, the question on everybody's mind is, well, mine anyway, is which way did Nephi and his family go? Well, we don't know. So far, all the people we've talked to have mostly discussed crossing the Atlantic. But there obviously are other oceans, right? I mean, several. But I'm talking about this one, the Pacific. Here, too, there is evidence that people have been voyaging for centuries. So we are here in Hawaii, as mentioned, to find out more about that. Oh, this is the kind of evidence gathering I need more of. Hi there. What I mean is, well, we know that a westward journey to the New World is possible. We've talked a lot about that. Philip and his crew, many others have done it. In fact, it's highly probable that Mulek himself from the Book of Mormon went westward from the Old World to the New. Well, what about Lehi and Nephi and their group? They could have gone either way. If they went south from where we believe Bountiful was, depending on the direction of the winds, you know, the northeast monsoons could have driven them up past the north part of Australia, through Polynesia, and then on to the New World. So I am here for a reason in Hawaii, actually, is to talk to some people who know about this side of the globe and sailing and maritime activities over here. In fact, a guy by the name of Mark Ellis, I'm going to go talk to right now out on a very cool little boat. Should probably get going. I'll give it another minute.
Oh no, grab it.
It's a rental.
The Iosepa was built in 2001 and is a 57-foot double-hulled canoe. Unlike modern ships, the Iosepa was painstakingly hand-carved and is made from dakua wood from Fiji. The Iosepa was made to be a floating classroom as part of BYU Hawaii's Hawaiian Studies program to teach ancient Polynesian navigational skills. It's been dry docked at the Polynesian Cultural Center for the past 8 years, but recently the Iosepa was prepared to sail again as part of the 2024 Festival of Pacific Arts, which for the first time ever was being held in Hawaii. I had the unique opportunity to board this beautiful vessel and speak with its captain, Mark Ellis.
So this is Iosepa. It's a double-hulled sailing canoe. So we have two hulls. It's 57 feet long and 20 feet across. It's kind of historically accurate as far as what we believe that our ancestors from Polynesia would have used.
When you say your ancestors, now that's what I'm interested in as well. I mean, how far back are we talking where they were making boats or canoes like this?
So we believe that our ancestors are traveling thousands of years ago throughout the Pacific.
Thousands.
Thousands of years. We had stories that they talk about coming up from Tahiti, coming to Hawaii, and then going back to Tahiti. Now, you got to remember, this is also going against the trade winds. So they're going against the trade winds. They're not floating and being pushed.
How do you just wait for a good day? How do you get where you want to go?
We believe our ancestors could navigate purposely into the wind and they knew about tacking and getting around the wind to be able to point in different directions. And then also we believe that they also knew nature intimately. They knew the stars. They knew as they rose and as they set, they knew which stars to follow until a certain point, and then which stars to follow after that to get them to this point of Hawaii that we are.
And that was thousands of years ago.
Yeah, about 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And in 1975, right at this beach right here that you guys came from, that beach right there where you guys left is where they launched Hokulea in 1975. In 1976, it makes its first voyage down to Tahiti using traditional navigation and wayfinding.
No kidding.
Using traditional wayfinding skills. So what we do is when we do navigation and wayfinding, we observe everything around us. So where is the wind coming from? How do we feel it on our cheeks? You know, we look at the sky, we look at the clouds, what are they doing? We look at the sun, where is it moving? You know, we look at the swells, we get the swell patterns. We use something called a star compass. And our star compass is all around us. So what you want to imagine is not like a Western compass where you hold it and then you follow the magnetic point and it points you, but you're in the middle of your compass. So on the canoe, we're in the center. He then separated the horizon on that they have into 32 equal parts. So we have these 32 equal parts that are on the horizon, and each part, we call it a house or a hale. And we call it that because we believe that the stars would rise in that house and they would set in the corresponding house on the other side. So everything rises. We know that this, just like the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. The stars do the same thing. They rise in the east, set in the west. We would then put into this construct, into these houses, different stars that we knew would rise at different times of the year. We would know that the sun would rise at the equinox, would rise due east and set due west. But we know that because of seasons, the suns go up to the north, gives us summer here in the north, and goes down to the south to give us winter here in the north, right? So we know that movement of the sun, and it sets the same way. And we would also put the swells into this compass. We would put the winds into this compass. And so we use all of these clues. And, you know, for us, we use technology in this modern day, but our ancestors, they didn't have the technology, and they were even more in tune with nature, and they understood all of this.
Is that kind of part of why these vessels exist to some degree?
I think they exist because they're tools that help us remember how innovative and creative our ancestors were.
You know, as most people in the 1800s, for example, probably also thought that Columbus discovered America and all of these new worlds were from the Spanish explorers. But here we have evidence, if you will. There were people that were sailing and shipping many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years before them.
Yes.
We're half mile from the shore, maybe, I don't know how far. Yep. And that took a lot of faith for me to get in the dinghy.
Yep, our smaller
Can't
canoe.
imagine, just heading off into the great blue yonder. Well, Mark, man, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Yeah.
After talking with Mark Ellis and being out on the sea for a bit, it gets easier to imagine the challenges these ancient travelers faced, and their stories are so inspiring. They help me as I navigate my way to the Promised Land. To wrap up this episode, I sat down with a young man from the Marshall Islands. Like Nephi, Mulek, and all the other travelers we've mentioned, he's had to put his trust in God when faced with the storms of life.
So I'm here with AJ. He's an employee here at the Polynesian Cultural Center, and by virtue of being an employee here, that means that you're also a student at BYU Hawaii. Congratulations, that's very cool.
Yes.
And how old are you?
I'm 26 now.
26 years old. And you're from?
I'm from the Marshall Islands.
The Marshall Islands. And what is your job at the Polynesian Cultural Center?
So right now I'm working at night show.
The night show?
Yeah.
What do you do?
I dance.
He's a dancer. Look at him. I love that. All right, so let's go back to the Marshall Islands, where you grew up. Were you raised a member of the church?
No.
No. Did you have religion in your life?
Yes. My parents, they're preachers for other churches, so I grew up with them. Yeah, in the other churches. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Your parents are Christian preachers?
Yeah.
But of other faiths?
Yeah. Other
so you
faith,
grew
yeah.
up the preacher's son?
Yes. It all started like back in 2015 when I met these two elders like, wearing white shirt, long pants, wearing their sandal and wearing backpack. I was really curious at first because I didn't even know what they're doing, but there was a strong feeling that wants me to go and just talk to them, asking them questions, you know. So they started to ask me to like have a lesson with them. It was really hard for me at first because my parents,
Yeah.
we didn't have our lesson at the house because my parents,
They said
yeah,
no.
Yeah, they said no. I remember the last two elders, like, because all of them, they've been giving me the Book of Mormon. When they like invite me to read it and then pray about it and ponder to Heavenly Fathers to give me the answer. And then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it. So I went ahead, I prayed about it, and then I started to feel this feeling like I never felt it before in my life.
What did it feel like?
It was warm, peaceful, loving, comfort. Like I started to feel like I know that Heavenly Father is like right next to me, like trying to tell me that the Book of Mormon is true.
From there, you tell them, okay, I'm ready to be baptized, or?
Yes, I told them that I'm ready to be baptized.
So how did your parents take this news?
Well, it was really hard for me, but I tried my best to like pray about it. So I asked Heavenly Father to help me, to strengthen me to like just go ahead and tell my parents that I'm going to be baptized. So I prayed about it and then I went ahead and I remember my mom was cooking food in the kitchen. So I tell her that I'm going to be baptized and she looked at me and she was like, what? Tell me again?
This is the first time she's hearing that anything about.
Yes.
Okay.
So I was like, Mom, I'm going to be baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints. And she was like, huh? Tell me again the things that you're saying. And I was like, I'm going to be baptized, Mom. And she was like, started to laugh, like, you know, thinking like, and I was like, okay. And she was like, okay, wait until your dads come home. And I was like, okay. No. At first, I remember him saying to me, like, if you go out with the elders or some people that come with another religion and teach you, and I see it and I saw you with them, I'm gonna kick you out from the house and I'm gonna beat you up, and then you will no longer be in our family. It was something that really frightened me a lot.
Yeah, of course.
I was really scared. But it came to the house, because after I was baptized, I was like, I'm just gonna go home. I'm just gonna pack all of my stuff and just ran away. Yeah, because I don't want him to like beat me up and then, you know, say things like, I'm not part of the family.
Right, disown
like, it's really
you.
hurtful, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So after the baptism, I went home. The moment I started packing, he came in. He came in.
Okay.
And I was scared. And he came in and he was really excited. He was like, hey, what's wrong, man? I was like, Dad, I baptized. And he's like, where? And I baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints. And then the great thing that he said, like, why didn't you tell us to come and support you? Yeah, I was really amazed with that answer.
What an answer to prayer.
Yeah, I was really amazed and started to know that the church is true. Because Heavenly Father already answered my prayers, like help me and help my parents to not get mad at me.
Wow.
And I started to, instead of going out and telling lies, I went out and served a mission and telling that it's true. The Book of Mormon really helped me, strengthened me to know that my family and I will be together forever.
Thanks again, man. This was great. Yeah, love it. Really do. Appreciate your time. Of course, most of us are likely to never face the seemingly impossible task of building a boat that can cross an ocean. But we're still all on our own unique, very difficult journeys to somewhere better, a happier place, a stronger family, freedom, a happier life, whatever, a promised land. And when it gets so hard that you just feel like quitting,
you can always be thankful that at least you didn't have to build a boat and cross an ocean. But you can learn from what they did. They used the tools that God provided them to guide them to that promised land. In their case, it was the stars, the wind, the tides, whatever. In our case, perhaps it's the tools of prayer and revelation, of prophets, of keeping the commandments, of studying the scriptures. I'm Scott Christopher. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time on A Marvelous Work.